either everything matters or everything is an outrageous waste of time. That is the proposal that Dara narrator Rachel puts forward in the new book Eternal Life that came out this month. Now, I purchased this new release from an author that I had never heard of because of the premise. I forget exactly whose channel it was, but somebody, in talking about books that are coming out in 2018, mentioned this book and mentioned the premise here on BookTube. Now, the premise reminded me of another book that I love, and that is All Men Are Mortal by Simone de Beauvoir. And surprisingly, both books deal with very similar themes in both similar and different ways. In Eternal Life, Rachel is a young woman, but also an old woman. She has the physical body, the physical genes of a woman of 18. She does age over time, but then by setting fire to herself, by bursting into flame, she returns as another 18-year-old version of herself, set to live out yet another life with yet another husband and yet more children and grandchildren who all die. And in the first chapter, she actually says that she is jealous of her own children because they get to die and she doesn't. I won't spoil for you exactly how she becomes immortal, but she makes essentially a deal with God. Now, that is a very telling difference between Eternal Life and All Men Are Mortal, which is about a man who has been alive for thousands and thousands of years and who encounters a young woman. In All Men Are Mortal, there isn't really a God in the traditional sense of the word. It is not God who has done this to the narrator, to the character rather. Whereas in Eternal Life, she was literally alive at the time of the last Jewish temple before it was destroyed. I'm not really up on my Jewish history, but she was a Jewish woman, and she made a pact with God in return for a favor for the life of someone close to her. She gave up her ability to die, and there's a sense in this book that even though that God isn't present, isn't intervening, he must exist out there somewhere, because after she made this pact at the temple, she lost the ability to die, and she has been alive up into the 21st century, because her current children and grandchildren, they're mining Bitcoin, they're using computers. She's got either a daughter or a granddaughter, I think. A granddaughter who is attempting to discover the secret to eternal life, and won't listen to her crazy grandmother who is telling her that this is not a good thing to do, that you don't want to be seeking eternal life. And I'm just going to grab my notebook here, because I was coming home on the bus from work today, and I wrote down a few things I wanted to touch on. So yes, there is that difference in terms of where this power has come from. In All Men Are Mortal, there is, of course, this higher power who has somehow cursed this man to be alive forever. But it's more of a magical, mythical power as opposed to a god. And these two books, which deal with a similar premise, treat the purpose of life differently. That opening quote in Eternal Life, either everything matters or nothing matters, and it's an outrageous waste of time. Eternal Life, I would argue, chooses to argue that everything matters. This woman continuously marries, continuously has children, and even as she mourns them, you get the sense that she very much enjoys spending time with these children, loving her husbands, spending time with her husbands over the years. And of course she's sad when everyone dies, and she wishes she could die herself. But she doesn't do what the immortal character in All Men Are Mortal does, after realizing how horrible it is that everyone's dying around him, and that he doesn't really have any control over these people in his life. He withdraws. He decides that nothing matters, and he wants to cease to exist. Even if he can't cease to physically exist, he can cease to mentally exist and to engage with the world. So there is that difference. Then I wrote down here as well, which may be a bit of a stretch, but I was rereading the third volume of Simone de Beauvoir's memoirs recently. She was talking about her thoughts as she wrote All Men Are Mortal, and she brings up the fact that this book has a lot to do with recognizing that people are individuals. The immortal man in this novel attempts to fashion the world to his desires. He attempts to manipulate events. He believes that since he's immortal, since he's around forever, then he can see this big picture, and he can influence people and build this gigantic empire that will belong to him. But he quickly discovers over the centuries that people are individuals. They cannot be collectively controlled. Each person has a mind of their own. Each generation itself has a mind of its own. And he can't control this vast expanse of individuals. And then in Eternal Life, we get kind of a similar understanding, although it's not as apparent because this book doesn't really deal with that. But there's no sense that Rachel is trying to fashion the world into her own image of what she thinks it should be. Perhaps it's because she believes that there's a God out there, or perhaps it's because she recognizes through her interactions with her children over the centuries that they are individuals as well, that she can't control them, she can't make them choose the career she wants, she can't make them marry the people that she wants them to, she can't even convince them to believe in her immortality. She recounts how she's been responsible in part for the death of some of her children over the centuries, because in trying to explain to them that she in fact cannot die, she moves to kill herself to show them that she's coming back to life. But as she kills herself, she inadvertently leads to their deaths. One child, believing that his mother has committed suicide by self-immolation, rushes to try to put out the flames and catches fire himself. Another child is caught up in a witch hunt. When she comes back to life after being burned as a witch, her son is carried off to be killed because he obviously comes from a family of witches. I think I've gotten a little bit off track, but those are my main notes that I had written down. Moving apart from the comparison of the two books, although All Men Are Mortal is my favorite of the two, I really enjoyed Eternal Life. Rachel is a likable character, and the plot remains interesting all the way through. You don't fall into any kind of cheesy cliches. You don't fall into kind of like false philosophy. And the ending was good too. I won't tell you what the ending was, but I was afraid they were going to go a certain way with the ending that just would have ruined the entire story for me. And Dara Horn did not. So if you're looking for a new release this year that will get you thinking about some things, and that may perhaps lead you to reading some older literature, I would suggest that you check out this book, Eternal Life by Dara Horn, and you've got to admit this cover is pretty great as well.